Shiur, I have to warn you that in the last two chapters, and we're going to do the last two chapters of the Guide for the Perplexed now. We're not going to continue with the Tamei Mitzvot. We'll leave that until middle of March when I get back. 13th of March is the next session. But the Rambam never ceases to surprise us. And he ends with a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is an English phrase that means suspense. I think in French we'd say suspend.
Me.
Suspend, okay. Hi, Robert. And he leaves us with riddle, just as we've had from the very, very, very beginning. And what we are going to make of this, I don't know. I will try and connect some dots, okay? But Rambam never ceases to surprise and to tantalize. So having said that, let's go into some share screen. Last two chapters of the Guide for the Perplexed. Le Guide des Égarés, I believe, in French. זה הפרק, כולל פירוש ענייני שלושה שמות שהוצלחנו לפרשם. Rambam, after he's done the Tamei Mitzvot, gone through all 14 groups of mitzvot and shown you his historical acumen and how they fit in, and then lots of philosophical ideas about how they're meant to make us better people, bring us to perfection, then goes back to something he actually did at the very beginning, words and what they mean. Remember, we talked about words, especially in order to avoid attributing any body to God, anything physical to God. Now he's back to words, and we don't know why. And three words, he says, chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. I'm going to tell you in this penultimate chapter, the chapter before the last, about chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. Why? We don't know. So he's puzzling us at the very beginning. Kvar be'arnu be'perush avot shechesed inyano. Now he tells us what chesed is. Okay. In typical Maimonidean fashion, following Aristotle, we need to know what words really mean. So what does chesed mean? Haflaga. Haflaga is excess. Okay? Excess. We're exceeding the norm, going above and beyond. Any type of excess is called chesed. Generally, it's used when you're doing a good deed, and if you go over and above. How do you go over and above? Well, I will tell you what Rambam says. Either you do the good deed to somebody who you wouldn't normally have done a good deed to, or you do a good deed in a much more good way than you would normally have thought of doing. So it is in terms of the subject and in terms of the quantity, I guess. And then he says, Rov Shimush, middle of line 6. Sifrei Hanuvoah, Bimlat Chesed hu hatava lemi she'en lo chok alecha klal. When the prophets and the Bible talks about chesed, generally it talks about doing more than you need to somebody who you wouldn't normally have had been under obligation to be good to. So it is gimilut chasadim. We know what chesed is. We have chesed funds, thank goodness, in our communities and in our Jewish societies. We're doing chesed above and beyond what we need to do. Jews have always been known as being gomlei chesed. Okay. Now, anything that God does is an act of chesed, because God doesn't need to do anything for anything at all, okay? In fact, he created the world is an act of chesed. He created us. It's an act of chesed. Everything that God does is chesed, because God doesn't need to do anything. He's not bound by any rules. So, chasdei Hashem azkir, and ubavur ze hametziut kulo, and the whole of the universe is chesed, and therefore it says, the beginning of line 9, olam chesed yibaneh. We have come across this phrase from Tehillim, okay? We use it when we say that chesed makes the world into a positive place. Of course, what it means is that God built the world as an act of chesed. Inyano binyan haolam chesed hu. Va'amar yitbarach b'sipur midotav v'rav chesed. We learn that one of the things that God does is he does a lot of chesed, okay? And he doesn't need to do it. So we know what chesed is. Why we need to know what chesed is at the end of Moreh Nevukhim, we don't know yet, do we? Right? Right. Okay, so let's continue. Umilat tzedakah. Now Rambam feels he wants to tell us what tzedakah is. So he says, it is righteousness, doing the right thing, and righteousness is giving everybody his fair share of what there is, okay? Justice, if you like, distributive justice, natural justice. ולפי העניין הראשון לא יקראו בספרי הנבואה החוקים שאתה חייב בהם לזולתך כשמשתלמם צדקה. But when the prophets talk about tzedakah, they don't mean tzedek. They do not mean justice, okay? כי כשתפרע לשכיר שכרו תפרע חובך. When you pay your bills or you pay your worker their wages, that's not called tzedakah, okay? אבל החוקים הראויים עליך לזולתך מפני מעלת המידות יקרא צדקה. Tzedakah actually, said the Rambam, means something which is the result of virtue, okay? Tzedakah is a moral virtue, and that's the sense in which we use it, sense in which the Torah uses it, and we're going to give an example straight away. The Rambam always gives examples. So what is his example? Line 13, in the middle. The Torah tells us a law in Book of Devarim. If you lend money to somebody, you're entitled to ask for a guarantee, okay? A pledge, something that, I give you 500 shekel or 500 francs, Swiss francs, 500 euro. You give me your watch, okay? Or you might give me your pajamas. And I'm saying that advisedly. You might give me your pajamas, okay? And I've got your pajamas and I've lent you 500 francs. Okay. Now, this is not tzedakah. That's the law. But, ulecha tiyeh tzedakah. What will the person who does tzedakah do? I lent you the money. I get your pajamas. My pajamas are the security for the loan. I'm not going to give you the pajamas back until I get my money. But what happens if the person who borrowed the money is a poor person, okay? And they have only one pair of pajamas. So what do I do as an act of tzedakah? Every night at the time of going to bed, I go to the poor person's house. I say, here are your pajamas. Have them to sleep in overnight. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., I'll be here knocking at your door, waiting to get the pajamas back because you haven't paid me the 500 francs. And we do this every single day. Now that is a Maaseh Tzedakah. And God says, Ulecha tiyeh tzedakah. This will be accounted to you as an act of tzedakah. Dvarim kaf daled yud gimel. That sort of thing, as I say, a moral virtue, it's tzedakah. כי כשתלך בדרך המעלות המידות כבר עשית צדק לנפשך המשכלת. Very nice phrase. Now he says that tzedakah is in fact a tzedek for your intellectual soul. Ki shleimat ki shilamta la chuka. You have in fact you've done justice to your soul by going overboard and doing a maaseh tzedakah. So this is a unique Maimonidean approach to the word tzedakah that we use when we talk about giving people money when we don't need to. We give them more. We often go through a lot of moves in order to give tzedakah. It's clearly way above gimilut chasadim as well. So this is the type of tzedakah he's referring to. He says there's an element of tzedek because this makes you a better person. If you're a virtuous person, you're you are able to get closer to understanding God in the Maimonidean way we have talked about. Remember, you start with knowing science and how the world works, then you become an ethical person, then you go on to metaphysics and understanding God in a pure way. So this is tzedakah. By the way, chesed, of course, can mean something else as well. Do you know what else chesed means? Shameful deed. Shameful deed. There's an odd pasuk in the Torah in Achremot, talking about incest with a sister. It says chesedhu, and that word actually, Jean, means to be ashamed. It's a shameful act, because I refer to Mishlei Kafhei pasuk Yud, where it says pen yechasedcha shomea v'dibatcha lo tashuv, lest you become ashamed. So words will have different meanings too. Tzedakah and tzedek are two different terms. Tzedek definitely means righteousness. We understand that it's what is required by law, but tzedakah is much more than that. And tzedakah applies to emunah as well, as we read in Bereshit, when God says to Abraham, you will have many descendants, okay, like the stars of the heaven. Say meha atztigninus shelcha, leave your astrology and believe that you will be the father of a great nation. Even the stars say that you will not. What does the Torah say? Vayachshaveha lo tzedakah, hemin bahashem. Abraham believed in God, and therefore this was accounted as a tzedakah, not tzedek. Much more generous in terms of his belief, as generous chesed is called tzedakah. Ritzoni lomar ma'alat ha'emunah. When we make an extra fence around the Torah and we provide shmirah to the Torah, that's called a tzedakah. Aval milat mishpat. Now we get to the third point, which is disposed of quite quickly. A mishpat hu lashon b'meh ra'uil ala nidon yiyeh ze chesed o nekama. Mishpat is strict law. Whatever the law requires, we do, whether it's to reward people or punish them, that's mishpat. כבר ביארנו בהרחקת התארים, כי כל תואר שיתואר בה אלוה, יתברך בספרי הנביאים, הוא תואר מעשי והיה לפי המציאו הכל נקרא חסיד. When you apply these terms to God, he's called a chassid, not because he is anything in his essence, but he does acts which are like acts of chesed, so he will do acts which are like acts of tzedakah, so he's called a tzaddik, and also hashofet kol haaretz, tzaddik v'yasharhu, v'rav chesed. So we know what this means. Now he says, v'chavanatenu hayta. Why are we doing this? Befaresh inyanim inyanei elu, to explain these matters, hashemot, those names, hatzah, this is an introduction, the perik haba achar zeh, to the next perik, which is the last one. So we still don't know why we had to go through this at the end of the Moreh Nevukhim, but apparently it's prepare us for the next chapter, the very last chapter of the Moreh Nevukhim. Okay, so what's the Rambam going to tell us in this chapter that he didn't tell us in chapter 51? We all know by now. I could ask you probably in the middle of the night, wake you up and say, what are the three stages in Maimonides' guide to perfection? And you will, without an instant's hesitation, open your eyes, clear your throat, cough a little and say, 1, we have to understand intellectually whatever there is to understand in the world. Number 2, we have to become the most ethical people in the world. Number 3, we contemplate in solitude upon God's essence, which we can never know, but we can know much more about him than the normal rank and file. And when we get to that stage, we're at a stage approximate to prophecy, and then we will be the most perfect people that ever were, and we will die a mitat nishika imir Hashem. In other words, just like Aaron, Moshe, Miriam, our souls will simply fly out of our bodies because they are so heavenly on this earth. They don't need any more earthly existence, and they are, as it were, prophets, angelic prophets, walking in bodies on earth, but really they are already in the celestial realms. That's what we would expect at the end of Moreh Nevukhim. Correct? Correct. And what do we get? Something strange, because it's a mixture of things, and the climax is totally unexpected. So let's start. Shem Chochmah. The Rambam says, now the last chapter I have to tell you about the word Chochmah. Really? Well, why? But okay, the Rambam says so, then you must have a good reason. Nofel b'lashon ha'ivri al arba dvarim. 4 things are included in Chochmah. Now, either it is the true Chochmah that we've been talking about, perfection, close to being a prophet, you understand everything. You are, in other words, another Maimonides, okay? Master of everything. Okay. Jack of all trades, master of them all. And of course, there are psukim to prove that this is the case. Now, also, Chochmah is used about arts and crafts. And when we read about the building of the Mishkan, which we'll do soon, we read, V'chol chacham lev bachem, v'chol eshet chachmat lev. Of course, this might be chachmat lev, but it's Chochmah. Okay, arts and crafts. Then it could be ma'alot hamidot, moral virtues. V'zikenav yechkam. That pasuk, I don't know whether you recall Tehillim Kuf Hey, but it starts with Hodul Hashem, that we say every morning, Kiru Vishvo, Hodiu V'amin Alilotav, and we stop before we get to the bit about Yosef. Yosef appears in this parak of Tehillim, and all sorts of nice things are said about Yosef, how he got the king to improve, and then it says, and he made the Chachamim of Egypt wise. Now, the only way he could make them wise was in moral virtue. He wasn't going to cure them of their Egyptian idolatry, but he taught them what it is to be an ethical person. Yosef Hatzadi. Okay. By Shishim Chochmah, the older you get, as Aristotle says, you will be more virtuous. Generally, the hormones are less active. Fires die down. We are generally more virtuous as we age. That might be a little tongue-in-cheek. That's what we have. Aristotle, by the way, said that true ethics are only within our grasp when we're over 40. Now he goes back to what we said last time about the cunning and the subtlety, subtil, okay, the talatuf, all right? So Chochmah is also used in that sense. Paro says, Hava nitchak malo. Let's be cunning about the Israelites and find a way of destroying them. Anybody know this passage in the book of Shmuel Bet Yudalet? Yoav took a wise woman. What did he take her for? Anybody remember? It was to do with problems he had with his sons, kings, Well, anyhow, Avshalom got in trouble. He killed his half-brother Amnon. Why did he kill his half-brother Amnon? Because Amnon had raped Tamar. Now, David was not very happy. So Avshalom flees from the court, and David doesn't know how to handle him. Yoav solves the problem. He brings a clever woman from Tekoa, actually, and Tekoa women are apparently very clever, because there's another episode at Avel Bet Ma'acha, where the clever woman saves the city. But she acts out in front of the king some kind of play and convinces him to bring Avshalom back to court. I don't know whether Shakespeare got his idea in Hamlet from this passage in the Tanakh, but you may remember when he says, the play's the thing wherein we will catch the conscience of the king. Okay, whatever. Ratzonol Omar, Ba'alat Orma v'tachbula. Again, that word Orma, Jean, right? Orma, but in a positive way or in a negative way. It all depends. Yirmiyahu says that there are Chachamim who use their Chokhmah to do evil. Upamim tiyeh ha'orma hahi ההתחכמות לקנות מעלות שכליות, או לקנות מעלות מידות, או ללמוד מלאכת מעשה, או תהיה ברעות ובמידות מגונות. So you can use your chokhmah for all sorts of things. And I'm just repeating the idea that chokhmah or talatuf in medieval Islamic philosophy is not necessarily a bad thing. That orma is a good thing because it describes how, in fact, things take place in the world. And that we talked about last time at length. הנה התבאר שחכם יאמר לבעל המעלות השכליות ולבעל מעלות המידות ולכל בעל מלאכת מעשה ולבעל התקבולות במעשים מגונים וברעות. ולפי זה, now the bold bit in line 33, הביאור יהיה חכם בכל התורה על אמיתתה, נקרא חכם משני פנים. And of course, the best type of chokhmah is the last type, the fourth type, okay, which is the one that gets us to the highest level where we have ma'alot hasichliot, again, our intellectual perfection, and which includes, of course, the midot. And that is what we are aiming for. Now, then the Rambam goes on to say, Ulefi zeh habiur. Okay. Then he goes on, I'll give you this in Précis. He talks about the fact that the Torah is a stepping stone to true chokhmah. We do the mitzvot, we do the things that we do, we daven, and when we're davening, of course, we're thinking and training our brains and our minds, and we're becoming more abstract, okay, to get to the final perfection, okay? And this, and therefore, all the psukim about chokhmah in Mishlei and other parts of the Tanakh, line 39, the last two words, ala chokhmah hahi asher telamdenu hamofet al deot haTorah. We will understand the Torah a lot better, and we will have a pure understanding of the Jewish faith if we are chachamim. We have to be chachamim. Okay, that's Rambam, with no question about that. Okay, ahava comes out of yidiyah, knowledge, understanding, rationality, wisdom. There we are. Okay. Then he goes on to say that Moshe Rabbeinu was both a chacham and a Baal Torah. He knew chokhmah, which is philosophy, science, theology, and he knew Torah, and he could put them together successfully. So we say about Moshe Rabbeinu Masechet Megillah, Av b'chokhmah, Av b'Torah, Av b'Nevi'im. He was the chief wise man, he was the chief Torah personality, and he was the chief prophet. Ubash b'Shlomo, but it says in relation to Shlomo, Vayechka mikol Adam, remember? Shlomo was wiser than all people. Amru, v'lo mi Moshe. When you look at Masechet Rosh Hashanah, it says he wasn't wiser than Moshe. So what does this mean when it says Shlomo was wiser than Kol Adam? Not that he was wiser than every other person. Disabuse yourself of that notion immediately. Mikol Anshe Doro, it only means like Noach. He was the wisest of his own generation. And that's why the Pasuk continues to say, Heiman, v'chalkol, v'darda b'nei machol. He was wiser than these guys, the wisest of his time. But he wasn't, Chachamim Mefursamim, not as wise as Moshe Rabbeinu. Don't even think for a second. Okay? So we've learned something else. Now, the Rambam then goes on to say, Hinei hitbailacha, shidiyat haTorah etzlam, the last word on line 2, now line 3, min echad v'chokhmah min acher, and the true chokhmah is to be able to combine with your Torah truth in the theological, philosophical sense. So we're going over the same ground, okay? Now he goes on to say, I want to tell you a little about chokhmah from a philosophical point of view. The philosophers, and he says, ha-philosophim ha-kedumim. Who are the early philosophers? Aristotle, Plato, the Greeks. And who are the acharonim in philosophy? Okay, they are the Muslim commentators on Aristotle and Plato. They are Ibn Rushd, or as he was known in Latin, Averroes, and Ibn Sina, known in Latin as Avicenna. All these works were translated by Jews from Arabic into Latin for the benefit of the Catholic thinkers who were the mainstay of medieval philosophy in Western Europe. And of course, Al-Farabi, who's known in Latin as Al-Farabius, wouldn't you know? Okay, so all of this is all very fascinating, but we're not going to go into it now. But Rambam wants to tell us about Chokhmah. Eventually, he might get to the point, and all this is very interesting stuff. Now, he tells us that the philosophers say there are 4 types of wisdom. Harishon, 5. This is more like cleverness. Most people in the world spend most of their lives being clever at what? Making money, at acquiring things. Ratzoni lomar, beginning of line 6, getting hold of money, fine clothes, utensils, slaves, and property. Or status, a great leader, a great king, prime minister, president. This is the lowliest type of wisdom and use of your life. Because all of these are things you acquire. By the way, Ibn Tibbon is a very good translator because Kapach translates the word as Shleimut HaRechush. But Rechush is actually concrete physical property, whereas Kinyan is even having stature and being great and having fame, okay? So, there's something to be said. It's difficult to read. Ibn Tibbon is a very good and faithful translator of Maimonides. Now, this type of perfection 7, okay, is a wisdom. What you get is never you yourself. There is you and your money, you and your presidency. And when you're no longer president, does anybody care about you? When you're no longer prime minister, does anybody? When you're no longer the richest man in town, does anybody care about you? You and your kinyanim are 2 separate things. So it's not really you, okay? Dimyon gamur, it's all a fantasy. Ritzoni lomar, beginning of line 8, shezeh beiti v'zeh avdi v'zeh mamon sheli. This is my house, my slave, my money. These are my armies. But all of these are external to you as the person. They all exist. The armies exist, the money exists, the house exists, but the connection between you and these things is an external connection. They are not inherently part of you. This is Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, chapters 7 and 8. Okay, for those. Okay. So when you're no longer the prime minister, and you reflect upon what you once were, no different than you and Buzaglo. Okay, the guy who does the cleaning of the street. Same thing, you're all the same. But the prime ministership remains. The money remains, the villa remains, but you are no longer part of it. All of this is really chasing after the moon. Philosophically speaking, you have to be a Greek philosopher to be convinced, because so many people spend their lives pursuing money, wealth, power, that it can't be that easy to dismiss. But this would be an Aristotelian view. And by the way, Greeks, the ancient Greeks, they definitely had a society which was a meritocracy. They celebrated people who were physically sound, mentally well-balanced, virtuous, and philosophically minded. Greece was not a place where money was admired. And can you give me a Greek story that proves that? Midas, thank you. I have a fountain of wisdom and knowledge sitting to my left. The story of Midas and the golden touch. Why on earth? Everything you want, so everything you touched, is this really? This is very Greek, but it's interesting to think about this. And Rambam was clearly very impressed. And he wants us to hear this. Now, what's the second type of perfection? And also very Greek. Greeks believed in a beautiful mind, in a beautiful body. You look at a Greek statue, any Greek statue anywhere in the world, it's a beautiful person, male or female. They're never old. They're eternally young. The bodies are perfect, okay? You can stand and admire Michelangelo's David for hours on end, as I've known some people to do, okay? Because it's so incredibly beautiful, okay? Romans, on the other hand, were far more practical. They liked statues of old senators, all bald, grim-faced, and that's the message they wanted to project. Power, stern military power. The Greeks fought and the Romans fought. Anyhow, there we are. So the second one is that Hamina Sheni, we are the third word on line 13. Yeshlo hatlut b'teva hadam yoter min harishon. This is nice because he says this type of perfection is closer to you as you are. It's not separate from you like your possessions, but it's part of you. And what is it? Shleimut tavnit haguf utkunato v'tzurato. Your body, how perfect is it in your limbs, in your appearance, in everything about it? Ratzoni lomar she'emezek ha'ish hahu b'tachlit hashivui. The Greeks, of course, believed that health and bodily well-being was a result of internal harmony. They weren't great at recommending operations and all sorts of interventions in the body. They wanted to find a way of getting your body to work in a harmonious way. And then they believed that if you had the right balance of hot and cold, wet and dry, and you ate right and you exercised right, you probably would be very healthy for a very long time. Okay. And you also have bodily strength. So they spent their time in gyms, and they were soldiers, by the way. Socrates is famous for having been a very brave soldier. He's celebrated for that. Even in the coldest weather, he would go out with no shoes, just with a sheepskin cloak, and he would be very brave in battle. And he was chasin against all sorts of physical hardships, tremendous stamina. This is Socrates, the greatest Greek philosopher. So, en abat ve'en hu la'adam asher hu adam. Line 15, the last sentence. Maimonides says that's all very nice, but that is a perfection or a wisdom that we share with the animals. It's purely physical. What makes a human being, makes an Adam, is not the physical, it's the mental and the spiritual. Aval, now beginning of line 16, so if you have a wonderful body, you are a Sylvester Stallone, I mean, whatever you are, you're still like a big tiger or lion. I mean, actually beast-like. And even if you became the strongest man ever, Hercules, a real Hercules, you wouldn't be as strong as a mule or a lion or an elephant, says Rambam. So, you could be strong enough, but not the strongest. So what do these people do? They show off by lifting up huge weights, or they do tremendous karate chops and they break bones. That's all very fine, but it's only a bodily perfection. But toelet nafshit nederet mizeh hamin. There's no spiritual or intellectual perfection here. Let's have a look. I'm on the 1, 2, 3, the fifth word on line 19. What's the third type of wisdom or perfection? That's ma'alot hamidot, ethics. Okay, ethics in the Aristotelian sense, without a god, but ethical person, highly respected in Athenian society in its philosophical age. So that is that a person should be as ethical as possible, and this This, however, say the philosophers, has one drawback. It's not you all the time. When are you virtuous? When you interact with other people. If you're living on a desert island, can you be virtuous and use the word, I am virtuous? If you're living on a desert island, you don't come into contact with any other single person. Well, Aristotle thought that you could not. It wouldn't make sense to call you virtuous, because virtue always is in relation to others, to help them to be magnanimous, to control your own needs, to let others come first. When we talk about virtue, it's always in the context of social life. And of course, as the Greeks did say, a human being is a polykon zoon. Okay, we a zoon politikon. We live in society. Society is very important. So that's not that can't be the final perfection, because again, you yourself are not imbued and infused and permeated with this. As he says, line 21, the fourth word from the end. Ki amidot kulam einam rak ben ha'adam u ben zulato. Virtues are only applicable to person who is in relationships with others. Shim taleb libcha shechad ben ha'adam omed lavado ve'en lo esek im adam nimtzu kol midotav hatovot omdot betelot. You live on a desert island, nobody else there, then your virtues are basically not activated. ואין צריך להם, לא שישלימו בדבר, ואומנם יצטרך להם לקבל תורתם עם זולתו. As soon as somebody comes on board, then you have to exercise your virtues. So that leaves us with the fourth perfection, or fourth wisdom, which is hashlemut ha'enoshi ha'amiti. I'm now in the middle of line 24. True human perfection. hu הגיע לאדם המעלות השכליות, רצוני לומר, ציור המושכלות, ללמוד מהם דעות אמיתיות באלוהיות. This is not Aristotle, this is Rambam, who says it is knowledge of God. We're back to our theme that we've been working on right through the Moreh Nevukhim, so we're happy. וזאת היא התכלית האחרונה, והיא משלמת האדם שלמות אמיתי, והיא לא לבדו, והאורה יזכה לקיום הנצחי, and then you'll get to live forever, remember? מיתת נשיקה, that's it, you're there, you've got a perfect soul. ובא האדם, אדם, and this makes you a man, person, male and female included, ובכל כל שלמות מן השלוש שלמויות הקודמות, הנמצאות בזרחה, לא לך, השלמות, this perfection is yours alone, and nobody can ever take it away from you. That was what we talked about once before. I mentioned Natan Sharansky. I said that Rambam's ideal would be that you could be persecuted in a terrible way, and still your mind and heart will be full of the God, and you would not despair, and you would continue. Okay? And he cites a pasuk, which is actually a different context entirely. It's to do with women, of course. Beginning of line 28, Mishlei says, you should have something which is yours alone. He's actually referring to a wife, okay? A chaste and pure wife who never betrays. Rambam turns women in general into wisdom and Torah. Leimor lachokma achoti at pasuk. My sister becomes philosophy and Torah. So here, the idea, although this is very Greek, is that the best thing you can ever have is something which nobody else can take away from you, which is always yours and you never lose. And that is your inner perfection, okay? The inner life, the via contemplativa, as it were. And he cites a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, end of line 30. B'nei yimini charubi, samuni notera et hakramim karmi sheli lo natarti. It's my vineyard that I have to grow and develop. Not the things you do to others, the kindnesses and the patience, but it's how far have you got inside yourself. Don't give your splendor to others and your magnificence to those who are cruel, who will perhaps abuse you. Develop yourself. All this sounds very good, Maimonides. We're happy here. And so the prophets have also explained to us these things, and they have echoed the philosophers, or perhaps the philosophers got them from the Navi. ואמרו לנו בפירוש שאין שלמות הקניין ולא שלמות בריאות הגוף ולא שלמות המידות, שלמות שראוי להתפעל ולהתהלל בו ולא לבקש אותו. None of these wisdoms are the ultimate wisdoms, not possessions, not bodily perfection, and not ethical perfection. And how does he know that this is what the prophets say? Because he's got a pasuk. Pasuk, we said, the end of the Haftarah, every Tisha B'Av morning. Okay? Asof HaSifrim, how does it end? Line 38, last two words. Ko Amar Hashem, thus says the Lord, Al Yitalel Chacham B'Chochmato. Let not the wise man praise himself for being wise, or be praised for being wise. Al Yitalel HaGibor B'Gvorato. The mighty man should not be praised for might. Al Yitalel Ashir Ba'Oshro. Nor should the rich man be praised for his wealth. Ki B'Zot Yitalel Hamit Halal. But if you want to be praised for something, Hamit Halel, Haskel v'yadoa oti, understand, use your intellect, and get to true knowledge of God. Maimonides, right through the guide. That's what we've been aiming at, right? That's exactly what we would expect to find at the end of the guide for the perplexed. Histakel, look, says Rambam. Ech lekacham k'fi sidram etzel he'amon. Okay, we have an order here that people would go for. Hashlimut hagadol etzlam ashir ba'oshro. They think that the rich man is the best man. And after that, the mighty man, the one with power. And after that, the one with ethical virtues. We all want ethics. Even evil people, said George Bernard Shaw, would like to be regarded as being virtuous. Ritzoni lomar, balamidot hatovot ish hu gam ken gadol b'nei hahamon asher lahem ne'emru hadvarim ומזה סדרם על הסדר הזה. וכבר השיגו חכמים ז"ל מזה הפסוק אלו העניינים בעצמם אשר זכרנו. So the prophets have already presaged the Greeks, and they've told us what I've told you in this perek, that the chokhmah in every case is aimed at what you yourself have created inside your mind and your heart, and all the other stuff is external to you. It's not really the best. Okay, and that includes virtues as well. Nothing compares to the Tachlit Acharon, the final goal. And Ushma Divreihem Be'elu Hanyanim Belishonam V'hu Bereshit Rabbah. Now, look what they've said in Bereshit Rabbah. Rambam always has sources. A wonderful thing. He says, Katuv echad omer v'chol chafetzim lo yishvu ba. Nothing that is desired in life is equal to chokhmah, true wisdom. And it also says, Ochol chafatzecha lo yishvu ba. And everything that you should desire will never equal wisdom. They're two different psukim. How does the Midrash reconcile? It says, mitzvot ha'ma'asim tovim are the desirable things, but they are not equal to chokhmah. Chokhmah is greater than mitzvot. And chafatzecha, these are the precious stones, and they too will not be worth the haskel v'yadoa oti. Okay. So now we all know what we're meant to be aiming for, correct? Now we get the bombshell. Are you ready? Nod. Give me a thumbs up. Okay, ready for the bombshell. ואחר שזכרנו זה הפסוק, ומה שכלל מן העניין הנפלאים וזכרנו דברי החכמים ז"ל עליו, נשלים כל מה שהוא כולל. Now that we've learned all of this and we understand it, new ideas, חוכמה, צדק, משפט חסד, וזה שלא הספיק לו בזה הפסוק לבאר שהשגתו יתברך לבד, כנכבדת שבשלמות, we know what is the best perfection, okay? כאילו הייתה זאת כוונתו היה אומר, and the pasuk in Yirmiyahu should end with, כי בזאת יתהלל המתהלל, השכל וידע אותי, okay? This is where we should end the pasuk in Yirmiyahu. This is where we should end the Moreh Nevukhim, correct? Correct. This is the logical point to which we've been aiming at for 24 weeks. Vaya posek dvarav, and that's where Yirmiyahu should stop. Or Yirmiyahu should have said, Haskel v'yadau oti ki ani echad. I could have said, okay, I am the one, unique, only. That's a good Maimonidean idea. Or he could have said, ki en li tmuna. If you want to start being a perfect person, forget all your childish notions of Bible stories and images of God as an old man with a beard and as the prophets with wings or angels and all of that. Or ki ein kamoni, as no like me. When you use a word about God, you can never really use it and understand fully because there's always what we can't understand. Or mashe dome laze, or something else like that. Okay, that's what we should have read at the end of the pasuk, but that's not what we did read, because what does Yirmiyahu continue to say? Look at line 15, the beginning. I'd like somebody to read this actually. After Haskel v'yadoa oti, who'd like to read? Ki ani Hashem. Deb, would you like to read line? Which? Line 15. Ki ani Hashem on page 3. "15 on line 3, the beginning. Ki ani Hashem.
כי אני השם עושה חסד, משפט וצדקה בארץ. ואחר כך השלים העניין ואמר, כי באלה חפצתי נאום השם.
Wow. After Haskel ve'adoa oti, Rambam talks about chesed, mishpat, utzedakah, ba'aretz, on earth. And he says, Ki be'ele chapatzti num Hashem. This is what I desire, says God. After the whole build-up, all the perfection, intellectually, academically, scientifically, astronomically, biologically, zoologically, economically, geometrically, physically, metaphysically, ethically, it is what? What God wants is to do chesed, mishpat, utzedakah, ba'aretz, not inside of you, but on earth. And this is what I want. Retzono lamar, shekavanati she'atza mikem chesed utzedakah mishpat ba'aretz. I want you to do chesed, tzedakah, and mishpat on earth, as we explained in the 13 midot. Hashem Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun, El Chapayim, El Chesed V'Emet, Noseh Chesed La'alafim, Noseh Avon V'Pesha V'Chata V'Nokeh, Ki HaKavana Lidamot Bahem V'Shenelech Al Darkam. We should apply God's attributes. Now, you could have knocked me over with a feather, as they say in English. Is this the climax of the Moreh Nevukhim? Really? Everybody asks this question. They come to the end of the Moreh Nevukhim. Okay, Jack, are you with me? Jack, you want to unmute?
Papi, du musst unmuten.
Unmute.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm listening.
Right. Are you shocked? Say yes.
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. Say yo, zicher. Okay. Zicher. We're all shocked. We can't even open our mouths. We don't know what to say. Is this Maimonides at the end of the guide? Okay. So again, Maimonides always challenges. And אם כן, הכוונה שזכרה בזה הפסוק היא ביורו, ששלמות האדם שבו יתהלל באמת הוא, Now, says the Rambam, okay, sit back. The world has not come to an end. Don't worry. But I do have a very important message for you as I leave you, because this is the end of this book. The message is that human perfection, and this is the perfection that ought to be praised, is להגיע אל השגת האלוה כפי היכולת, לדעת השגחתו בברואיו, והמציאו אותם, והנהיגו אותם איך היא. Of course, you have to know and understand everything in the world and God and what God is about, and have a pure idea of God, not a primitive, superstitious idea. Okay? But the major goal is to be able to do chesed, tzedakah, umishpat, which is acting like God. How can we really know God? The answer, of course, is no. Even the most perfect person, Moshe Rabbeinu, got very close, but ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. He never got the whole way. No human being can. So what can we do? If Moshe didn't get there, are we? Now, the program is a wonderful program. Can we even get to where Maimonides was? Highly unlikely. So what are we to do? And remember, this is the end of the book sent to his student, Yosef ben Yehuda, who's very into philosophy, very into theology, but the Rambam is giving him Judaism. He says, I take on board, as we've just seen now, Aristotle, the commentators. I think that if you look at the Tanakh, you see a huge amount of rational philosophy there, and the world is guided by wisdom and not will. But nevertheless, there is an important message I have for you at the end. What we have to do is imitatio Dei. We have to try know God, which we'll never get to do completely, but the least we can do is to imitate his ways. Now, imitating his ways does not mean, I'm going to be a bit coarse about this, Prostfrumkeit, doing things, because you'll often get them wrong. But it means understanding God's attributes, which are the virtues. Chesed, emet, shpat, tzedakah. These are the things you need to do. ללכת אחרי ההשגה ההיא בדרכים שהתכוון בהם תמיד. We strive to know God, but in order to live, we have to do the things that God does. להידמות בפעולות אלוה, to copy what God does, כמו שביארנו פעמים בזה המאמר. As we've said a few times here, זה מה שראיתי לשומו בזה המאמר, I want to help you. And you know what? At the end of the day, this is going to help. Now, this reminds me of the end of the book of Kohelet. What's the last pasuk in the book of Kohelet? Anybody's free to recite it. Hello? Is there anybody out there? Or am I all alone? The last pasuk of Kohelet. Robert, what does it say? Sof davar
hakol nishma esor lakim yirei ki zeh kol ha'odom.
That's mitzvah of Tishmael. That's what you forgot.
Sorry.
But that's fine. Michael, thanks. In other words, we've had a book full of philosophy, asking, is it good to aim for wisdom? Is it good to aim for happiness? Should you just lead a life of Epicurean satisfaction, even though Epicurus didn't say so? Whatever it is, at the end of the day, we get something that seems to almost to contradict what's gone before. It's not a contradiction of what's gone before. What's gone before shows you that when you try to analyze out in a Socratic fashion everything that we do in life, they'll come up with contradictions and variations and pros and cons. At the end of the day, we all have to live. At whatever level we are intellectually, whatever level we are spiritually, we need to live. And we will live that way if we copy God's attributes. And this is why Haskel v'yadoa oti is not enough. And we have to do chesed, mishpat, u'tzedakah ba'aretz, as God says through Moshe to Pharaoh's court, Leman dat ki ani Hashem ba'aretz. You will know that I am involved. I'm not an Aristotelian God who's simply out there, the unmoved mover, and is there and has no connection. What God wants at the end of the day, and what Rambam advises all of us, is to put into practice tzedakah, mishpat, and chesed, but as a result of chokhmah, not as a substitute for chokhmah, but after you've reached the highest levels of chokhmah that you can, and we're all at different rungs on this particular ladder, remember that at the end of the day, every day, you live in imitatio Dei. Do those things. And that's why now we know why Rambam has the penultimate chapter on tzedakah, chesed, u'mishpat, why he talks about chokhmah. This is the golat hakoteret, okay, the goal of the whole thing. ואני מקווה עליך שאם ההסתכלות הטוב תשיג כל העניינים שכללתי בו בעזרת האלוה יתברך, וזכינו וכל ישראל חברים למה שייעד לנו. Rambam now becomes almost emotional. Yisrael chaverim, ze lazeh. Think about this carefully. It's for all of us. As tipakachna einei ivrim. But of course, he can't resist being Maimonidean to the end. May the eyes of the blind be opened up. Voznei chershim tipatachna. And the deaf become receptive to true hearing. Ha'am ha'olchi b'choshech ra'u or gadol. Let the people who've been walking in darkness and ignorance see a great light. Yoshvei ba'aretz tzalmavet, or noga alehem. This radiance is going to burst out over those who have been struggling in shadow. Nishlam hachelek hashlishi bezrat ha'aloa uvehishalomo nishlam Moreh Nevukhim. We've now finished the guide. Let me give you just some examples from the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, which is as philosophical as Hilchot, as Moreh Nevukhim, but it's more digestible. He says in Hilchot Deyot, "Umitzuvim anu lalechet b'drachim ha'elu habeinoniim." We have to pursue the derech habeinoni. V'hem hadrachim hatovim ha'isharim shene'emar v'halakta b'drachav. To go and this as resting on a basis of divine attributes. Mahu nikra chanun, afatah chanun. Be gracious. Rachum, be merciful. Be kadosh, holy, spiritual. Don't be carnal, crass, individual. Al derech zeh karau hanavim la'el b'chol otan hakinuyin. Erech hapayim, rav chesed, tzaddik v'yashar, tamim, gibor v'chazak. And these are the attributes of God which we should copy. L'odia shehen drachim tovim yisharim v'chayav adam. Let me just give you one practical example from Hilchot Avadim, laws of slaves. Rambam completes his halachic exposition of the laws of slaves in the Mishneh Torah. He says, "Mutar la'avod be'eved Kanani b'fareh." Legally speaking, you can work a Canaanite slave real hard. V'afal pi she'adin kach midat chasidut v'darchei chokhmah. Chokhmah, not only chasidut, not only chesed. It's chokhmah that underlies the chesed and is also the goal of the chesed. Chokhmah, knowing God, understanding, feeling, and translating that in your life on this earth into the midot. Sheyeh adam rachman v'rodef tzedek v'lo yachbid ulo al lo al abdo. So don't make your slave suffer. V'lo yitzeh lo, and don't cause him pain and aggravation. Give him to eat and drink from what you eat and drink. Chachamim harishonim hayu notnim le'eved mikol tavshil v'tavshil shayu ochlin. Rabban Gamliel, I'm sure, gave Tavi, his servant, the best black Angus steak that he had served to him. He passed on to Tavi. And they feed their slaves and animals first. Harihu Omer, Keinei avadim el yad adonehem, keinei shivcha el yad givirta. we look to our masters, the slaves look as masters and mistresses of magnanimity and kindness. Treat them with dignity. Don't explode in anger. Listen to them. If they have a justified claim, treat it seriously. A lovely pasuk from Eov. Eov is talking about, of course, Eov didn't happen, as Maimonides has told us more than once. It is a mashal. The whole book is a parable about the question of suffering and evil in the world. But he has this beautiful pasuk. Im emas mishpat avdi va'amati berivam imadi. Why would I act badly towards my slave, male and female, and if they have a claim against me, spurn their claim? Halo bebeten oseni asahu. The same womb, type of womb that produced me, produced him. At bottom, he and she are human beings, just like me. We were formed in a similar womb. We all go back to one origin. The en hachzariyut va'azut mitzuya ela ba'akum of the avodah zarah, those Sabians we talked about, star worshippers, they're the ones who lose their temper and who treat people badly. אבל זרעו של אברהם אבינו ואין ישראל שהשפיע עליהם הקדוש ברוך הוא, טובת התורה וציווה אותם בחוקים ומשפטים צדיקים רחמנים, והרחמנים הם על הכל. וכן במידותיו של הקדוש ברוך הוא שציוונו לדמות בהם, הוא אומר ורחמיו על כל מעשיו. His mercy extends to all his creatures. וכל המרחם רחמים עליו שנאמר, תנך רחמים ריחמך והרבך. So these are some illustrations. I'll stop the share and I'll just say a couple of things. Well, I'll say one thing actually, that this conclusion to the Moreh Nevukhim has generated a huge amount of literature, of course. Rambam seems to be backtracking like, we were expecting the usual Maimonidean criticism of the fools, the building up of the intellectuals and the theologians. Instead, we end up all fuzzy and warm. Shmuley, Chesed, Mishpat, Tzedakah, what is going on here? There are two approaches in the literature which is very extensive. One is something I said earlier, which is similar to Sof Davar HaKol Nishma. The Maimonidean agenda is well beyond more than a tiny fraction of the human race. Remember, Rambam says Adam, he doesn't confine this to Jews. But generally, humankind, it's a very tough proposition. As Immanuel Kant said rather pessimistically, out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight can ever be made. So it's very difficult, and we do not really get very far. So in a way, Rambam is ending on a note of despair. This is how Shlomo Pines understands it. And he was a great expert on the Rambam. Rambam says it's almost impossible to get there. So the least you can do is copy God. Imitatio Dei, if you can do these things and have your life infused with chesed, tzedakah, mishpat, and aspire as much as you can, as in the Divrei, as in his Mishneh Torah. If you do have a slave, be kind, be merciful, be generous, be good. That will bring you a long way to perfection. But many others have said no. The Rambam, in fact, is giving you in the last chapter, very last, or 2 chapters of Moreh Nevukhim, a different approach to perfection. Yes, you've got to become this super philosopher, great theologian, master of a true and pure understanding of the Bible and Jewish texts and the Talmud, away from superstition, Prost, Frumkeit, all those silly things that people the